Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Let's get started and look into our daily quiz. Let's look into the first question. Consider the following statement with respect to Central Pollution Control Board. It is statutory organization constituted under the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974. It collects, compiles and publishes technical and statistical data relating to water and air pollution and the measures devised for their effective prevention, control or abatement. Which of the statements given above are correct? The answer to this is both. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference in the Indian Express article. So this article here makes a mention of the Central Pollution Control Board. Let us try and understand what are these statements. When you look into the first statement, yes, it happens to be a statutory organization. This was established by passing an act of the parliament and it is constituted under the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974. And do note, when you consider this particular act, it governs the water and the air pollution. It serves as a field information and also provides technical services to the Ministry of Information and Forest. So the first statement is right. There can be another statement which says that the CPCB happens to be an extra constitutional body. If this statement is also given, that would also be right. So statutory provisions, statutory organizations, statutory authorities can also be extra constitutional bodies. What is this extra constitutional bodies? We have for example UPSC, we have for example the Election Commission. It finds a mention in the Constitution of India. So any authority which has a mention of its authority in the book of the constitution, that becomes the constitutional authority. So this happens to be a constitutional body. But anything which is not mentioned in the constitution of India but is passed by the act of the parliament, that becomes the extra constitutional organization or the authority. So the Central Pollution Control Board is an extra constitutional organization. Yes, it is a statutory organization and it is also an extra constitutional body as well. What does it do? It collects, compiles and publishes technical and statistical data relating to water and air pollution and the measures devised for their effective prevention, control or abatement. This statement is also right. So what are the functions of the CPCB at the central level? Advises the central and the state government on matters related to prevention, improvement and control of air and water pollution, planning various programs to control and prevent air and water pollution, planning and organizing training programs for people involved in activities for the prevention, improvement and control of air and water pollution, collecting, compiling and publishing statistical and technical reports relating to water and air pollution. As part of the assignment, you have to put on the comment section, is the Central Pollution Control Board does also look into noise pollution? Does it also look into preventing the noise pollution? Is what you have to put on the comment section. So basically, the Central Pollution Control Board plans and organizes, trains all the personnel so that it is able to prevent, control and abate water and air pollution. It also prepares manuals, codes and guidelines as well. It also lays down rules and regulations, modifies according to time as well, and also performs other functions as prescribed by the Government of India. Now let's look into the next practice question. Under the National Air Quality Monitoring Program, which of the following air pollutants have been identified for regular monitoring at all locations? Carbon monoxide, oxides of nitrogen, sulfur dioxide, respirable suspended particulate matter and fine particulate matter PM 2.5, ozone. Which of them are identified for regular monitoring as part of the National Air Quality Monitoring Program? The answer to this is 2, 3, 4 and 5, which means there are about 4 pollutants that are monitored under the National Air Quality Monitoring Program. Which are these? It includes oxides of nitrogen, sulfur dioxide, respirable suspended particulate matter PM10 and fine particulate matter. Why have we taken this practice question? We did discuss about CPCB. The CPCB in itself has launched a nationwide program called the National Air Quality Monitoring Program. What is the objective of this program? To determine status and trends of ambient air quality, to ascertain whether the prescribed ambient air quality standards are violated, to identify non-attainment cities and control air pollution on those cities, to obtain knowledge and understanding necessary for developing preventive and corrective measures, and under this, four pollutants are regularly monitored by the CPCB. This includes sulfur dioxide, oxides of nitrogen as NO2, respirable suspended particulate matter, and fine particulate matter. These four are monitored under this particular program, and ozone and carbon monoxide does not come under the National Air Quality Monitoring Program. Now let's look into the next practice question. With respect to International Court of Justice, which of the following statements are correct? The court settles legal dispute between nations and between individuals in accordance with international law. The seat of the court is at Peace Palace in New York. Judges are eligible for re-election. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is 3 only. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference in the Indian Express article. This article on the Indian Express makes a reference to the International Court of Justice, which is why we have taken this practice question. Let us try and understand what are these statements. When you look into the first statement is wrong. The court settles legal disputes between nations and between individuals in accordance with international law. The first statement is wrong primarily because only states are eligible to appear before the court in all the contentious cases. So if there are disputes between states, if there are disputes between countries, that can be sorted out as part of the International Court of Justice. This court does not have jurisdiction to deal with applications that come from individuals or non-governmental organizations, corporations, or any other private entity. Yes, it does deal with disputes between the nations and not between the individuals. So the first statement is wrong. When you look into the second statement, the seat of the court is at Peace Palace in New York. This statement is wrong. Why? It is not in New York, but it happens to be in Hague, Netherlands. This happens to be the only organization of the United Nations which is not in New York. Rest of them are in New York, but this is in Hague at Netherlands. So the second statement is also wrong. But when you look into the third statement, yes, judges are eligible for re-election. Since the first and the second statement are wrong, the third statement is right. The answer to this would be 3 only. Now let's look into some of the information which can be very important from the preliminary examination point of view. The ICJ is composed of 15 judges. Judges have a tenure of 9 years each. They are elected independently by the UNGA and UNSC. The candidate should get an absolute majority in both UNGA and UNSC to be elected. No two judges can have the same nationality, which means there are 15 judges. These judges will have to be from different countries. No two judges can be from the same country. The members of the ICJ do not represent their governments but are independent magistrates. The judges must possess the qualifications required in their respective countries. The judges are distributed as per the regions. 3 from Africa, 2 from Latin America and Caribbean, 3 from Asia, 5 from Western Europe and other states, and 2 from Eastern Europe. Among the 15 judges, there is a president, a vice president, and a registrar, and the judges are also eligible for reappointment as well. So this means that after the first tenure is done, are they eligible for reappointment? Yes. Now if we look into the ICJ jurisdiction, there are 2 types of jurisdiction. One is the contentious cases, the other is the advisory opinions. ICJ, in accordance with international law, settles dispute of legal nature that are submitted to it by states. Countries should apply and only then appear before the ICJ. So it can only deal with disputes when the states concerned have recognized its jurisdiction. The judgment is final. It is also binding on the parties to the case and without an appeal. Then there is advisory opinion, where the advisory procedure is available to 5 UN organs, 15 specialized agencies, and 1 related organization. Despite having no binding force, the court's advisory opinion nevertheless carries great legal weight and moral authority. Now let's look into the next practice question. 38th parallel frequently in use demarcates Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, Turkey and Syria, North and South Korea, Sudan and South Sudan. Which of it speaks about the 38th parallel? The answer to this is North and South Korea. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference to the North and South Korea in the Indian Express article. So remember, we have the 38th parallel. The 38th parallel demarcates North Korea and South Korea. So when we speak about 38th parallel, this was chosen back in the year 1945 by United States of America and the Soviet Union as a convenient borderline for the divided military occupation of the Korean peninsula. So the North Korean part was controlled by the Soviet Union. What it had was a communist ideology. At the southern part, what we have is a South Korea, and what it purely had was a liberal state in the South Korea part, which was ultimately controlled by the United States of America. So there was clash of ideologies, and currently when you look at North Korea, what it has is a communist mindset. When you look at South Korea, what it has is a capitalist mindset. So the 38th parallel as a demarcation came up back in the year 1945. Korea rapidly developed two ideologically different regions. So we have a socialist state in the north and a liberal state in the south. This happens to be with respect to the 38th parallel. Then there are other different kinds of names as well. For example, we have the 17th parallel. This happened to be the dividing line between the North Vietnam and South Vietnam. As part of the assignment, you have to put on the comment section, we have something called as the 49th parallel. It divides, or there is a general rule, it divides two countries. Which are these is what you have to put on the comment section. Now let's look into the next practice question. Who among the following gave a systematic critique of the moderate politics of the Indian National Congress in a series of articles entitled New Lamps for Old? Aurobindo Ghosh, R.C. Dutt, Syed Ahmad Khan, Veera Ragachari. The answer to this is Aurobindo Ghosh. This happens to be a previous year question from the year 2008. So if we speak about New Lamps for Old, we have one of the notable freedom fighters who happens to be K.G. Deshpande. He was a friend of Aurobindo from his Cambridge days, and he was in charge of a weekly called as Hindu Prakash that was published from Bombay. He requested Sri Aurobindo ji to write upon the political situation back then, how the Congress was moderating the sessions, what was the way the Congress was operating. So he asked Aurobindo to write a series of articles. So the series of articles written by Sri Aurobindo ji is what is called as the New Lamps for Old, and this strongly criticized the Congress for its moderate policies. So this New Lamps for Old is a series of articles which was criticizing the Congress and was written by Aurobindo Ghosh. Now let's look into the fact of the day. The fact of the day for today's discussion is taken from PIB. What are we discussing about? We will be discussing about the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. So the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana was launched back in the year 2000 with an objective of providing unrestricted all-weather road connectivity to unconnected villages of India. So the focus here was on the rural side of India. Why was this taken up? We had the national highways, we also had the state highways as well. And at the same time, there were a number of village roads, rural roads, which were not developed. So the government of India felt that people were not wanting to go towards the rural India. There were a number of doctors, educators who were not willing to go to the rural India because the infrastructure facility was not provided. There was lack of infrastructure, so they were not moving. And at the same time, there was migration to the cities as well. So in order to make sure that there is enough infrastructure at the rural level, back in the year 2000, what we came up with is the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, which is about roads, which is about infrastructure at the rural level. This happens to be a centrally sponsored scheme and is also part of the poverty reduction strategies of the government. Eligibility for the scheme: rural areas with a population of 500 above in plain areas, hill states including northeast, desert states, tribal areas and other backward areas with a population of 250 and above were selected as part of the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. Apart from building new roads, the scheme also has provisions for the upgrade of existing roads in these areas, although the primary focus is to provide connectivity to unconnected habitations. all-weather road implies roads can be used throughout the year. Whenever you consider the rural areas, these roads were not all-weather roads. Summer, winter, heavy rains, sometimes when there is too much of flooding or too heavy rains, these roads were not usable. So in order to ensure that all-weather connectivity was provided, what we had was the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, which was initiated. To provide all-weather roads, the scheme envisages providing for the draining of roads by adequate cross-drainage structures such as culverts, minor bridges, causeways, so on and so forth. The scheme does not cover repairs to blacktop or cement roads, even if the surface condition is bad, and the share of the central government's funding is 60% of the cost, with share increasing to 90% for northeastern and hill states. Since this happens to be a centrally sponsored scheme, a certain contributions will also had to be made by the state government. What is the significance of the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana? The major idea being development of the rural India. Rural road connectivity is very important for two reasons. One is development of enhancement of rural areas, social and economic services, thereby increasing farm incomes and employment opportunities. As we initially discussed, there were people who were reluctant to go to the rural India. Now that the infrastructure is developed, the other basic amenities come up. When there is basic infrastructure, people started moving from the urban areas to the rural areas as well. Let's take for example, if there is not much of the infrastructure, doctors who would want to serve in the rural areas would also not want to work as well. So health at the rural levels would also be upset. So once the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana also came into picture, people also started moving to the rural areas. Functionaries such as health workers, teachers and agriculture extension workers also started moving to the rural areas. Thereby, the other amenities were provided and basic amenities like health, education were also started expanding in the rural areas. So what we had was development of the infrastructure, what we had was creation and employment opportunities, and ultimately it led to the overall growth of the rural sector. But there were certain challenges that are associated with the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. What are those? The main happens to be the funding. Whenever we speak about any program, what it requires is constant funding. But when it comes to Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, there are lack of dedicated funds. There is involvement of the Panchayati Raj institutions as well, but it is very limited in scope. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this topic. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.